All right, in this video, we're going to talk about Enoch's view about objectivism. And objectivism is one way to be, it's sort of the opposite of cultural relativism, right? Now, of course, to be a subjectivist, right, which is the opposite of an objectivist, is not necessarily to be a cultural relativist. There's other ways to be a subjectivist. But to be an objectivist is to deny cultural relativism among other beliefs, right? And Enoch wants to give us reasons why he thinks that objectivism about morality is true, right? And again, I'm not going to try to convince you of much in this class, but this is one of the things I want to convince you about, because if objectivism is true, then the arguments and the reasons we're going to be thinking about in this class matter, right? Because they're trying to get at what the truth of the matter is, right? What is actually ethically right or what is actually ethically wrong, right? And all objectivism says is there is some truth to ethical judgments. I'll put it like that, right? That is to say that some things are objectively true when it comes to morality. Some things are objectively false when it comes to morality or ethics, right? Okay, so he gives us 3 tests that he calls them. And I think these tests are really interesting and helpful ways to think about whether or not objectivism is true in the context of morality and ethics. So, the first one is what he calls the spinach test. And this comes from a little joke about a little kid, and this is definitely something a little kid would say. I hope my child says something like this. My children say something like this sometime in the future. So a child does not like spinach, and he reports that he's glad he doesn't like spinach, because if he did like spinach, then he would eat it. But spinach is gross, so he's glad he doesn't like it, right? Okay. Now we're going to be sort of annoying and explain the joke, which is something annoying that philosophers do sometimes, so we're just going to ruin the humor here. The reason that that's funny, the reason that that's silly, that makes us maybe want to laugh, I don't know, maybe you didn't laugh, but the reason that it's at least somewhat funny is because, of course, if the kid liked spinach, then he would be glad that he was eating it, right? The whole idea that he doesn't like, or that he would be upset that he was eating it, is predicated on belief that he doesn't like it, right? Okay, so what the way that the spinach test works is basically make a joke like the spinach test, right? Insert, instead of spinach, insert, moral beliefs or scientific beliefs or whatever. And if the joke turns out to be not funny, or if the formulation isn't funny, then that's a sign of objectivity. And if not, then it's a sign of subjectivity, right? The reason that it's funny in the spinach test is because it's all about a subjective judgment, that he doesn't like spinach. So of course, it's not something that he enjoys, right? Of course, he wouldn't want to eat it, but if he did like it, then of course he would want to eat it, right? His preference would change the reality, right? Is another way to put it, right? His preference for spinach would change the reality or the experience. But there's all sorts of things for which our preference or our beliefs would not change the reality, right? So consider, this is Enoch's example, consider someone who says, gosh, I'm really glad that I live in a time when I know that the earth revolves around the sun rather than the other way around, right? Because if I lived, like 2,000 years ago, then I would think that the sun revolved around the earth, and that would be wrong. Yeah, that's not funny, right? It's a sign of objectivity, because what we realize there is that the subjective beliefs that the person holds about the earth revolving around the sun, those do not determine what the reality is, right? In the spinach case, the feelings about spinach change whether or not you would like it, whether or not you think it's yucky, right? That's not the case in the case of the earth revolving around the sun, or vice versa, because the earth does revolve around the sun. Period, end of story, right? And your beliefs have nothing to do with that. Okay, so now let's consider another example, right? Suppose it's someone who says, wow, I'm glad that I live in a world in which slavery is illegal, right? Because if I lived, 500 years ago, then maybe I would have thought that slavery was legal, and moral and ethical, but it's not. It's really horrible, right? To me, and hopefully to you as well, that sounds a little bit more like the Earth going around the sun version than it does the spinach version, right? Because it doesn't seem that our subjective views about slavery change the reality of its ethics or its morality, right? My beliefs about it have nothing to do with whether or not it's good or bad. It's just bad, period, end of story, right? Okay, good. So that's the spinach test, right? So the next test is the disagreement test. And for this one, Enoch wants us to imagine that we're having a disagreement with someone, right? So I don't know, disagreeing about what the best type of beer is or the best sandwich place. I think it's Jimmy John's, right? It's got to be Jimmy John's. But having a disagreement about that, right? If I have a disagreement with you and you're like, no, Subway's better, right? And I'm like, but come on, the bread at Jimmy John's, have you had it? And they're like, yeah, but personalizing your own sub, that's way better. Italian urban cheese bread, I don't know, right? Having that disagreement, I might think that, you're wrong at the end of the day, but it's a weird sort of disagreement, right? Where I recognize that at the end of the day, it has something to do with your preferences rather than with your, the reality of the situation or something like that, right? Now compare this, again, to a disagreement about whether or not the Earth is round, right? There's some flat earthers out there, and having an argument with them feels like important, right? At the end of the day, you might just say, whatever, if you don't want to believe it, that's fine. But I'm not just going to say, well, it depends on your preferences, whether or not the Earth is, round or flat, right? You're just going to say, well, it's round. I don't care what you believe, it's round, right? It seems like ethics sort of goes in that direction as well, right? Suppose someone came up to you and said, murder's okay, right? I would just say, no, it's not. What are you talking about? Murder's not okay, right? And so it feels like a more objective thing, right? The disagreement that you might have with someone feels more like the disagreement that you would have about some scientific fact than it does feel like the disagreement that you would have about some matter of preference, like your favorite sub-sandwich place or whatever, right? Okay, so that's the disagreement test. And then the final one is the what-if test. What-if test. So this is a situation in which you imagine that your beliefs change, and then you figure out whether or not the underlying reality changes as well. Okay, so let's suppose that fur hats, cool fur hats, like Davy Crockett wore or whatever. I don't think those are in style right now. I'm not very much in tune with style, so maybe they are. But if we found ourselves in a world where everybody was wearing fur hats, then it would just follow that fur hats were popular, fashionable, cool, right? All that needs to happen is that people need to start wearing fur hats in order for them to become in fashion, to become the preference of a society, to become my own preference, perhaps, right? Okay. So what's interesting to note there is that if the world itself changes its behavior, then the underlying reality changes as well, okay? What fashion is changes dependent upon what a society is doing, okay? That's not true for something like science, right? Smoking causes cancer. And if everybody tomorrow decides that it doesn't and starts smoking again, it's not gonna cancer's not gonna say, oh, I guess I can't start, right? It's still gonna cause cancer, right? At the end of the day. It's just true, right? There's nothing that we do is going to change that fact, right? And it turns out that ethics feels more like the cancer version, right? Race-based discrimination is wrong, right? It is wrong for someone to say you can't do that because you're black, or you can't do that because you're white, or you can't do that because you're Asian, or whatever, right? If we suddenly said, well, you know what, we can actually prevent Asian people or black people or whatever from doing this thing, it wouldn't suddenly make it right? It would still be wrong, right? If our practices changed, if what people were doing changed, it wouldn't change the underlying reality that such a thing is unethical and wrong, right? Okay, so what he's given us then is 3 reasons, 3 tests that all seem to point that ethics or morality is objective. And if it's objective, then it's the sort of thing that it doesn't depend so much on what your personal beliefs happen to be or what your society's beliefs happen to be. It matters what the reasons are, the arguments, right? In science, we use evidence, empirical evidence. You collect data and you come to conclusions. In ethics, if it is objective, as I think it is, as I think Gensler and Enoch have both shown that ethics is objective, then the way that we do that is we think about arguments, right? We use reasons to try to understand what the good life is and how to interact with various sorts of moral issues, what a good life would look like, and where to go from there. So we're going to take sort of a shift here in our class going forward. For the next few readings, we're going to be thinking about different theories of ethics, right? These are broad ways that people have determined, philosophers throughout the course of history have tried to come up with theories of what a good, ethical, moral life would be, what morality is at its very basic, its most basic version. So we're going to look at a few theories of ethics, and then we're going to turn on to some moral issues, and we'll go from there. Okay, until next time.